Hello, today I'm going to talk to you about globalisation. Firstly, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Mary Cosmo, and whilst I'm a third year student, this is my first online presentation. I've chosen to present my slideshow a little differently, and although I'm only using images, you'll be able to access the key points in the PowerPoint on Blackboard. I am hoping the images that I have chosen will help you to remember some of the content and some of the complex definitions encountered in this unit. Wish me luck. Here I go.
Our world is changing. That is the bit that everyone agrees on. The how, when, where and whys is a debate that will continue on outside our classroom doors. As teachers, our job will be to prepare children for a world where they will be successful, engaged citizens who enjoy happy relationships. The policymakers and decision makers who develop the Australian curriculum's benchmarks seek global best practice in its creation. A recent review by those who write these documents outlined their mission is to improve the learning of all young Australians through world-class curriculum, assessment and reporting. And yet, digital media is full of stories and complaints from teachers about the pressure being placed on them through assessment and reporting demands. They want to be able to deliver well-structured and creative lessons that scaffold children to achieve learning goals. Their complaints lay with constant assessment that is scaffolding an administration system and not the children. Why all this assessment, you may ask? The problem for teachers is that their focus is being shifted to lessons that prepare students for standardised assessments. The purpose of standardised testing is to support a system where comparison is the optimised outcome and not the learning. Comparison not only with children from their class, but children from other schools in the state. The children's result from each state is then compared, and Australia then compares themselves with the rest of the world. In 2013, Lingard, Martino and Reza Rashdi all agreed that this evaluative message system, framed as high-stakes testing, potentially affects both curriculum and pedagogy in reductive ways. Now, there is just one problem with this, and that is students aren't standardised. Students are delightfully and richly diverse. They come from different families, different communities, different cultures and different countries. They all arrive at school with completely different cultural and linguistic capital. Let's look at this a little bit deeper. A lion and a warthog are essentially the same thing, aren't they? Not convinced? They both have tails, they both walk on land, and neither one runs backwards very well. They both have fur, 2 eyes and a mouth. They are both in the same age and both think they are pretty smart to flourish in their environments. Their families both live in an area where there are trees, grass and plentiful water. Great. Now, this is where you come into it. With your knowledge that you have gained at university, I would like you to teach them how to jump through a hoop. After a month, we will give them a test and I need you to report the results. All the pieces just don't fit. Clearly, the curriculum writers who look to the world for guidance subscribe to a different ideology than classroom teachers. Interestingly, that differing ideology is the same word, globalisation. So 2 different perspectives of globalisation are right here. Our country must be competitive globally, the policymakers will say, and they will say that this is the effect of globalisation. Teachers will explain the diversity of their classes as a result of globalisation. So if you're still thinking, what is globalisation? You are not alone. Even after watching the lecture, well actually the 3 lectures that Catherine Doherty delivered, I still didn't get that light bulb moment where I thought, oh yes, I've got it. I could write an essay on globalisation. Probably because no one can agree on what it is and what its effects are or will be. Theorists like Roland Robinson even challenge its existence. Let's face it, the world can't even agree on the spelling. Is it an S or a Z? For just a piece of advice, if you want to Google it, pick the S spelling choice. Way less to read. Let's have a look at Tate's definition of globalisation in the textbook, thinking about each word. Complex amalgam of transnational networks, flows, practices and transformation. You certainly gain a sense of how hard it is to define succinctly, but certainly the choice of words indicates an element of fluid change as the predominant notion. As your first activity, I would like you to take this definition and reword it. When you look at the four narratives of globalisation as outlined in the textbook, it's quite interesting to look at each, apply your own experiences and knowledge, and decide how you think globalisation is changing our lives. The four narratives are becoming more the same, becoming more different. It's about being the same and being different. It's out there and it's in here. My question is, what is exactly changing? We know that digital technologies and effective transport networks are supporting trade and economic networks. We know that there is extensive civil and political unrest and war within our world that is forcing millions to flee their homelands, looking for safety and a better quality of life. But what is this increased interaction of people changing? Are these four narratives of globalisation talking about culture? Is globalisation causing changes to our culture? Let's overlay the word culture into the four narratives of globalisation. Cultures are becoming the same, becoming different. Is it about the same and being different? Is it out there or is it in here? Is globalisation causing cultures to melt together to be homogenous so we all end up looking and being the same, like the bowl of melted chocolate? Or is globalisation causing one big heterogeneous culture like this bowl of licorice all sorts? I think that our culture is becoming more homogenous in some ways, like the chocolate, and more heterogeneous, like the licorice all sorts as well. This is how I've come to my decision. First, we need to look at culture. Think about culture for a moment. It's another complex term with different definitions. For most of us, when we think of culture, we think of food, music, dance, architecture, sport, and language. The things we can see, taste, hear, and smell. Things that we can experience with our five senses. In his book, Cultural Intelligence, A Guide to Working with People from Other Cultures, Brooks Peterson compares culture to an iceberg. What is above the surface is the traits of culture you can identify with your five senses, the things that you can see, hear, taste, etc. The traits of a culture that are more apparent. The deep cultural beliefs, opinions, values, and philosophies that aren't so apparent or even visual lay below the surface. These are the cultural capital that, as teachers, we will seek and understand to engage students and the school community. Can you identify any of these? Catherine Doherty, in our lecture talked about time and different perception of time. This is interesting. Attitudes to time may differ between different cultures in often quite significant ways. For example, being late for an appointment or taking a long time to get down to business is the accepted norm in most Mediterranean and Arab countries. This is an example of a cultural trait that is not apparent when you meet someone. Let's look at some of the others. Have a look at these images and apply your cultural beliefs. The woman, clearly pregnant, baby on her back, carrying an enormous weight on her head. This represents a very different belief of women's and men's roles than to say Western culture. The man with 4 wives. Some cultures have different rules and assumptions about relationships. The All Blacks, a different expectation of macho behaviour maybe. How does this relate to globalisation? Let's go back to the chocolate and the licorice all sorts. What is becoming more homogenous in our society are the traits of culture that are above the surface, the traits that are apparent. An example of this is the English language. In a Flinders University paper, The Globalisation of the English Language, Doi Hoi writes, China has the largest population and history of over 5,000 years. In recent years, China has chosen English as the major foreign language taught in all colleges and universities, as well as in most high schools. And yet, people are holding tight to their long-held traditions, customs and values, those unapparent traits below the surface, making for a society that is more heterogeneous. Martha van der Bly supports this idea, and in the International Journal of Comparative Sociology talks of a global village, and that dominant economic globalisation is causing a resurgence of local identity. Okay, back to the students. Let's apply all of this to a delightful and diversely rich classroom. What counts as the most valuable knowledge and skills needed to negotiate the complexities of a rapidly globalising world? As educators, we need to look to the Australian curriculum. Overarching educational documents like the Melbourne Declaration requires that young Australians are to become successful learners, confident and creative individuals, and active and informed citizens in schools and communities that promote equity and excellence. Furthermore, fundamental to the early years framework is that the children develop a sense of belonging, being and becoming. Belonging is where and with whom you belong and is a critical foundation that allows children to be and become, thus cornerstone to successful outcomes. The general capabilities, personal and social, intercultural understanding, speak of giving children a sense of hope and optimism about their lives and the future, an interest in others, care, respect, open-mindedness, new and positive intercultural relationships and behaviours. I am thinking that this can all be put under one heading, and that is that we probably need to teach children cultural intelligence if they are going to be successful in the world. Lynn Van Dyne from the Michigan State University defines cultural intelligence as a person's capability to function effectively in situations characterised by cultural diversity. And she goes on to say, in today's increasing global and diverse networks, the ability to function effectively in multicultural situations is important. Van Dyne divides cultural intelligence into 4 factors: strategy, knowledge, motivation, and behaviour. Strategy is how a person makes sense of intercultural experiences. It reflects the processes individuals use to acquire and understand cultural knowledge. Knowledge is a person's understanding of how cultures are similar and how cultures are different. Motivation is a person's interest in experiencing other cultures and interacting with people from different cultures. Behaviour is a person's capability to adapt verbal and non-verbal so it is appropriate for different cultures. Cultural intelligence is socially constructed. Socially constructed by our upbringing, our friends and our community. As we learned in cultural studies last semester, the media is a significant influence. Let's test your socially constructed cultural intelligence. We're going to play an association game. I'm going to show you 2 images, and you, as you view them, identify the first 3 words that come to your mind. Now think about your answers. Did you stereotype? What role has the media played in the construction of your beliefs? You don't have to share, just be mindful. Did any of you identify the man in this photo as a victim? Sadly, he is. He is a brain surgeon who lives in the in a city in the UK, and he has lost his wife and 3 children in a house fire. The fire had been lit by an 18-year-old. The UK Daily Times reports that it was in response to media reports of a terrorist attack in Nairobi by Islamic extremists. When researching for this presentation, I found a journal on Islamophobia and the role the media plays. It's really interesting and easy to read. It's called Countering Islamophobia Media Representations, the Potential Role of Peace Journalism. It's written by Letitia Anderson at the University of Sydney. I'll put some links on the slide. It's worth a read. In this, she states that the media has consistently been identified by Australian Muslims as a central social institution contributing to experiences of fear and exclusion among targeted communities. In our textbook, Berdavec talks of a superdiversity existing as an effect of globalisation, and teachers would agree that this is their class, and this will be our class. With this in mind, how do we develop a child's cultural intelligence in a classroom? I think that modelling cultural intelligence is the most valuable tool as a teacher. Imperative also to this is that we must teach students to critically evaluate and question all images and viewpoints put to them. There is dialogue happening at the moment that indicates that as teachers we should be identifying students at risk of being radicalised. Really, the question should be, how do we stop minority groups from being pushed so far away that they have to turn to radical extremist groups for a sense of belonging? Is this a leading question? It is in fact a leading question, because I feel that the early years framework was right in its goals, that all children should be allowed to be, become, and the biggie, belong. I think that teaching students cultural intelligence is one of the most valuable skills for their success in a globalised world. On Blackboard, I'd like you to debate this statement and list 3 skills that you think are essential. Thank you for listening. I've attached some of the images used in the presentation at the end. As some exam practice, see if you can identify the definition that they represent. Thank you.